boys sold their most precious belongings to eat until the millionaire worked a miracle. Ethan felt his stomach growl once more as he clutched the yellow truck that had belonged to his father. Beside him, Jacob held tight to the brown teddy bear his mother had sewn with such love before being hospitalized. It was the third time the two brothers would go the day without eating, and the decision Ethan had to make seemed impossible for a boy of just 9 years old. On the crowded sidewalk of Canal Street in downtown New York City, Ethan looked at the toy in his hands and then at his younger brother's thin face. Jacob was only 6 and didn't understand why their mother hadn't come home or why Aunt Stacy sent them out every day with orders to get money by any means necessary. "Jacob, I need to tell you something," Ethan said, his voice shaking not from the morning chill, but from the ache in his heart. The younger boy lifted his brown eyes, still bright despite all the sadness they held. "We'll have to sell our toys," Ethan continued, swallowing back tears. "If we don't get money today, Aunt Stacy will be really mad." Jacob hugged the teddy bear tighter. "But this is from Dad, who went to heaven. And your truck, too." Ethan knew these were the only things left of a family that had once been happy. The yellow truck had been a gift from his father on his 7th birthday, 2 years before a work accident took away the man they loved most. The teddy bear had been sewn by their mother during an earlier hospital stay, when Jacob was even smaller and cried every night. The morning was cold and grey, typical of a New York winter. People hurried past, all with important destinations, clear purposes. Ethan watched the tired faces of workers stepping off the subway and wondered if any of them had ever truly felt hunger, the kind that gnaws at your stomach and makes your head spin. "Ethan, do you think Mom will come home soon?" Jacob asked, adjusting the teddy bear in his lap. Ethan didn't know what to say. It had been 3 months since Amanda, their mother, had been admitted to a public hospital with an illness the doctors called complicated. Aunt Stacy had appeared out of nowhere, saying she'd take care of the boys, but since then their lives had become a nightmare. Stacy was their mother's younger sister, but completely different. While Amanda worked 2 cleaning jobs to support her children, Stacy could never hold a job for long. She had habits Ethan didn't fully understand, but he knew they were expensive, and why she always needed money. "Jacob, let's get started," the older boy said to himself, taking a deep breath. He stood and held out the yellow truck to the first person who passed. "Mister, want to buy my truck?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. The man didn't even look and kept walking. Ethan tried 2 more times with other people, but no one stopped. Jacob watched silently, still clutching his teddy bear. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, take a moment to like and subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now, back to the story. That was when Richard Thompson entered their lives. The 45-year-old businessman was hurrying to his office, thinking about the important meeting he had in 15 minutes, when a child's voice made him stop. "Please, sir, will you buy it for any amount? I just need a little money for food." Richard turned and saw Ethan holding out the yellow truck. The toy was visibly worn but well cared for, clearly something deeply loved. The businessman looked at the 2 boys and felt something tighten in his chest. Ethan was a 9-year-old black boy, too thin for his age, wearing clean but patched clothes. His eyes held a seriousness that shouldn't exist in a child. Jacob, 2 years younger, was just as thin and hid behind his brother, clutching a brown teddy bear that looked like it had seen better days. "How much do you want for the truck?" asked Richard, crouching to meet the boys at eye level. Ethan looked at the toy and then at the well-dressed man in front of him. Richard wore a navy blue suit, shiny leather shoes, and a watch that looked expensive. Still, there was something kind in his eyes. "I don't know, sir. I just need money to buy bread." Richard took out his wallet and pulled out a $50 bill. "You can have this," he said, holding out the money. Ethan looked at the bill and shook his head. "I can't take that, sir. That's too much. My truck isn't even worth half of that." Richard was surprised. It was rare to find such honesty, especially from a child in such a difficult situation. "Then tell me how much it's worth." Ethan thought for a moment. "I think $10 is fair." The businessman smiled and handed him a $10 bill, carefully taking the yellow truck. "What about your brother? Won't you sell the teddy bear?" Jacob hugged the toy tighter and shook his head. I can't sell this one. Mommy made it for me when I was little. Richard felt his heart tighten even more. He tucked the truck into his briefcase and stood up. Where do you live? Ethan hesitated before answering. With our aunt, in Brooklyn. And where's your mother? In the hospital, Jacob answered, before Ethan could stop him. Richard checked his watch. He was late for his meeting, but something inside him told him this encounter was more important than any business deal. I have to go now, boys, but I promise I'll come back tomorrow. Ethan nodded, still clutching the $10 bill as if it were a treasure. Richard walked to his office, but his mind stayed with the two boys throughout the meeting. There was something in their eyes that deeply unsettled him. It wasn't just hunger or poverty. It was an old sadness, as if they'd already seen too much for their age. That night in his luxurious Upper East Side apartment, Richard held the yellow truck and examined every detail. The wheels were worn from rolling across the floor. The paint was chipped in places, but it was clear it had once been a quality toy. On the bottom, something was written in pen. For Ethan, with love from Dad, birthday 2022. The businessman felt a pang in his chest. He'd never had children himself. At 45, he'd devoted himself entirely to business, building a consulting firm that now employed over 200 people. He had everything money could buy, but in that moment, staring at a poor boy's truck, he realized something important was missing from his life. The next day, Richard arrived early in the city center. He searched for the boys on the same street, but they weren't there. He asked local shopkeepers, but no one knew anything. It was as if Ethan and Jacob had vanished. For 3 days, Richard returned to the same spot at different times, but the boys never appeared. His worry grew. What if something had happened? What if they were in need? On the 4th day, Mrs. Thompson, an elderly woman who sold sweets on the corner, approached him. You're looking for the boys who sold toys here? Yes, have you seen them? Their aunt came to get them Monday night, said they were going to live with her on the other side of town. Do you know where? Mrs. Thompson lowered her voice. I know that woman. Stacy's her name. She's not a good person, no. I've seen her around here before, always after easy money. Those boys are her nephews. Do you know where they live now? I heard her say she was moving to a house on the outskirts, east side I think, but I don't know the exact address. Richard thanked her and spent the rest of the day thinking about how he could find Ethan and Jacob. The unease he felt was unlike anything he'd ever experienced. It was as if those two boys had stirred something deep inside him. That night, Richard hired a private investigator. He explained the situation and asked them to find the boys as quickly as possible. 2 days later, he received a phone call with information that left him even more worried. Mr. Thompson, I found the address, but I need to warn you, the situation is worse than we thought. The investigator explained that Stacy had taken the boys to a small house in Queens, on the east side of New York City. It was a poor area, but the problem wasn't just poverty. Neighbors reported that the woman forced the children to go out every morning to beg for money on the streets. She herself rarely left the house, and according to reports, had problems with alcohol. The boys come home late at night, always exhausted and hungry, the investigator continued. It seems she keeps all the money they make. Richard felt a rage he hadn't known in years. How could someone do this to children? Especially children who had already lost their father and whose mother was hospitalized. On Saturday morning, Richard decided to go to the house. It was a simple 2-room building with peeling paint and a small dirt yard. He knocked on the door and waited. Stacy appeared after a few minutes. She was a woman in her 30s, thin and tired looking. Her hair was disheveled, and it was clear she'd been drinking the night before. What do you want? She asked, not fully opening the door. My name is Richard. I met Ethan and Jacob in the city center. I wanted to see how they're doing. Stacy's eyes narrowed. Who are you? Why are you looking for my nephews? I'm worried about them. I saw them selling toys to get food. That's none of your business. They're my nephews, and I take care of them my way. Richard tried to stay calm. Could I see them, just to make sure they're okay? No. And if you show up here again, I'll call the police. She slammed the door in his face. Richard stood there for a few minutes, hearing voices inside the house. He couldn't tell if they were the boys, but there was clearly an argument happening. As he was walking back to his car, he heard footsteps behind him. It was a neighbor, an elderly woman with grey hair who lived next door. "Sorry to intrude, but I overheard the conversation," she said quietly. "Are you really worried about the boys?" "Very much. How are they?" The woman looked around before continuing. "They're not doing well. That woman is trouble. The boys leave early every morning and only come back at night. Always hungry, always sad." "What about their mother?" "She's in the hospital, poor thing. Amanda is a good person, hard-working. She didn't deserve a sister like that." Richard introduced himself and asked if there was anything he could do. "Mrs. Wilson, that's my name. I do what I can for the boys, give them a plate of food when I can. But I have to be discreet. Stacy doesn't like anyone interfering." "Which hospital is their mother in?" "Mount Sinai Hospital, but it's far, and she's in a delicate state. The boys don't even really know what's wrong with her." Richard thanked her for the information and asked Mrs. Wilson to let him know if anything serious happened. He left his card and promised to return. On the way back, Richard couldn't stop thinking about the boys. There was something deeply wrong with the whole situation. A 9-year-old child shouldn't have to sell their most precious toys to get food, much less carry the responsibility of taking care of a younger brother. On Monday, Richard made a decision. He would go to Mount Sinai Hospital to try to find the boy's mother. Maybe by talking to her, he could better understand the situation and find a way to help. The hospital was enormous, and Richard spent over an hour searching for information about Amanda. Finally, a nurse confirmed she was admitted to the infectious disease wing, but only received visits from family. "I'm a family friend," Richard lied. "Her children are worried." The nurse hesitated but eventually gave him the room number. Richard went up to the 5th floor and searched for room 507. Amanda was lying in bed connected to some machines. She was a fragile-looking woman, around 35, but appearing older due to exhaustion and illness. She was awake, staring out the window. "Amanda?" Richard called softly. She turned her head and looked at him in surprise. "Who are you?" Richard stepped closer to the bed. "My name is Richard. I met your sons, Ethan and Jacob." Amanda's eyes filled with tears immediately. "My boys, how are they? It's been so long since I've seen them." Richard pulled up a chair and sat beside the bed. "I need to talk to you about them." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now, continuing. Over the next hour, Richard told her everything he had seen. Amanda cried non-stop, especially when she learned Ethan had sold his father's truck. "I had no idea," she said between sobs. "Stacy told me she was taking good care of them, that they were going to school, eating properly." "How long have you been hospitalized?" 3 months. I have a blood infection that's been hard to treat. The doctors said I'll still be here for a few more weeks." Richard realized Amanda had no clue what was really happening with her children. "Did you authorize Stacy to take the kids?" "I had no choice. When I was admitted, she showed up at the hospital saying she'd look after them. I was too sick to make any decisions. I thought it was the best option." Amanda explained she had no other close relatives. Her husband had died 2 years earlier in a construction accident. Since then, she'd raised the boys alone, working as a cleaning lady during the week and taking extra jobs on weekends. "I always managed to give them the basics," Amanda continued. "It wasn't much, but we never went without food, and they always went to school." Richard's chest tightened, imagining the effort this woman had put into supporting her children alone. "Amanda, I'd like to help. The boys are going through serious hardships. But why do you care? You don't know us." Richard thought for a moment before answering. "I met Ethan when he was selling his father's truck to get money for food. There was so much dignity in that boy, so much honesty. He refused extra money I offered, saying he only wanted what was fair. A 9-year-old taught me a lesson about character I'll never forget." Amanda smiled through her tears. "Ethan's always been like that, too serious for his age. Ever since his father died, he's tried to be the man of the house. And Jacob. Jacob is more sensitive. He's still so little, doesn't fully understand what happened to his dad. Sometimes he wakes up crying, asking for his daddy to come back." Richard stayed silent for a few minutes, taking in everything he'd heard. "Amanda, I have a proposal. I want to take the boys out of Stacy's house and put them in a safe place until you recover. But is that even possible?" "I'll find a way. I have some contacts who can help." Amanda squeezed Richard's hand. "Why are you doing this for us?" Richard looked into her eyes and answered sincerely, "Because I found something in your children that I'd been searching for my whole life without knowing. They reminded me of values I'd forgotten in the rush of business. Ethan showed me there's genuine honesty in this world. Jacob showed me there's still innocence worth protecting." That afternoon, Richard left the hospital with a clear goal. He would save those boys no matter the cost. First, he sought out Jennifer Williams, a family law attorney who specialized in child custody cases. Jennifer was a 60-year-old woman, experienced and known for her dedication to at-risk children. Richard explained the whole situation to her. "Richard, what you're describing is clearly a case of neglect," said Jennifer, "but removing children from a relative's custody isn't simple. We need proof." "What kind of proof?" "Documentation of neglect. Statements from neighbors, maybe photos of their living conditions. And it would help to have a social worker conduct an official evaluation." Richard felt frustrated. While they gathered paperwork, Ethan and Jacob continued to suffer. "Is there a faster way?" "Only if we can prove they're in immediate danger, or if their mother revokes the authorization she gave her sister." The next day, Richard returned to the hospital with the attorney. Amanda signed all the necessary documents, revoking any permission she'd given Stacy to care for the boys. "Now we have legal grounds," Jennifer explained, "but we still need to find a temporary placement for the children." "They can stay with me," Richard said immediately. "Richard, it's not that simple. You're single with no experience raising children. Child Protective Services will want a thorough evaluation." "Then let's speed up the evaluation." Richard used every contact he had to expedite the process. Within 3 days, a social worker was assessing his apartment and his ability to care for the boys temporarily. Meanwhile, Mrs. Wilson called daily with updates about Ethan and Jacob. The situation was worsening. Stacy had started sending the boys to more distant parts of the city, demanding they return with specific amounts of money. If they failed, they went without food. "Yesterday, they came home close to midnight," Mrs. Wilson reported. "They were exhausted and starving. I managed to give them a plate of food, but I had to hide it from Stacy." Richard felt his anger grow with each report. How could anyone be so cruel to children? On Saturday, a week after his first visit to Stacy's place, Richard decided to try a different approach. He arrived early at the spot where the boys were usually left to beg, a busy subway station in Times Square. It didn't take long to spot them. Ethan held a handmade sign asking for help, while Jacob sat beside him, clutching his teddy bear. Both looked thinner than when Richard had first met them. He approached slowly, not wanting to startle them. "Ethan?" The boy looked up and immediately recognized the man who'd bought his toy truck. "Mr. Thompson," Jacob said, running to hug the businessman's legs. Ethan stood up more slowly, his face a mix of relief and shame. "Hi, sir." Richard crouched to their level. "How are you both?" "We're okay," Ethan answered automatically, but Richard knew it was a lie. "Ethan, I spoke with your mother." The boy's eyes widened. "With Mommy? How is she? When is she coming home?" "She's recovering, but she'll need to stay in the hospital for a few more weeks. And Ethan, she had no idea you were going through this." Ethan lowered his head. "Aunt Stacy said Mommy didn't want us anymore, that she was tired of taking care of 2 boys. Richard felt his heart break. Stacy was psychologically manipulating the children. "That's not true, Ethan. Your mother loves you more than anything in the world. She's very worried and wants you both to be safe." Jacob tugged on Richard's suit sleeve. "So Mommy didn't abandon us?" "Never, Jacob. She would never abandon you." Ethan began to cry. It was the first time Richard had seen the boy show such raw emotion. "I tried to take care of Jacob, sir. I tried to get money so he wouldn't go hungry. But it's been really hard." Richard hugged both boys right there in the middle of the subway station, not caring about the passers-by staring. "You won't have to worry about that anymore. I'll take care of you until your mother recovers." "But Aunt Stacy said, if we don't bring $50 today, she'll give Jacob to another family." Richard froze. That was a serious threat. She said that? Ethan nodded. She said Jacob is too small and just causes trouble. That if I can't take care of him, she'll find a family who will. Richard grabbed his phone and called Jennifer. It's an emergency, he said when the lawyer answered. I need to get the boys out now. An hour later, Richard was at Stacy's house with the lawyer and a social worker from Child Protective Services. The boys stayed in the car with a caseworker while the adults knocked. Stacy answered, visibly agitated. What do you want now? Jennifer introduced herself and presented the documents. We have a court order to remove the children. Their mother has revoked your guardianship. That's a lie. Amanda gave them to me. There's no official paperwork for that, the social worker replied, and we have reports of neglect and mistreatment. Stacy tried to slam the door, but Richard held it open. Where are the boys' things? What things? They don't have anything. Richard entered the house with the others. The place was in terrible condition. Empty bottles littered the floor. The fridge was bare and there were no proper beds for the children. In a corner of the room, Richard found 2 small bundles with the boys' few clothes, the only belongings they could locate. You'll regret this, Stacy screamed as they left. I'll fight for my rights. You're free to appeal the decision, Jennifer said calmly, but for now, the children are under protective custody. In the car, Ethan and Jacob looked scared and confused. Richard turned to them. You'll stay with me for a while. No more begging on the streets, no more going hungry. You'll get to be kids again. Jacob hugged his teddy bear and smiled for the first time since Richard had met him. Ethan still seemed wary. How long? Until your mother recovers and you can be together again. Richard's apartment was on the 20th floor of a luxurious building in the Upper East Side. The boys had never seen anything like it. The elevator amazed them, and when they stepped inside the apartment, their jaws dropped. It's so big, Jacob whispered. You can explore all you want, Richard said. This is your home now. Ethan looked around carefully, still not quite believing what was happening. Richard showed them the room he had prepared for them. There were 2 comfortable beds, a wardrobe, and even some books and toys he had bought during the week. Is this really ours? Jacob asked. Of course, and tomorrow we'll buy new clothes for you. That night, Richard prepared a simple but nutritious dinner. The boys ate with voracious appetites, confirming they had truly been going hungry at their aunt's house. After their bath, Richard helped them get ready for bed. Jacob held his teddy bear tightly, while Ethan still seemed alert, as if expecting something to go wrong. Ethan, you can relax, you're safe now. You're not going to send us away? Richard sat on the bed and looked seriously at the boy. Ethan, I promise you, as long as your mother isn't well, you have a home here with me, and even after she recovers, you'll always be welcome. For the first time, Ethan completely relaxed. Richard turned off the lights and went to his room, but he couldn't sleep. He listened to the sounds from the next room, making sure the boys were okay. In the middle of the night, he heard footsteps in the hallway. It was Jacob standing in the doorway, clutching his teddy bear. Mr. Thompson, can I sleep here? It's too dark over there. Richard made room in the bed and Jacob lay down beside him. A few minutes later, Ethan appeared too. Jacob disappeared from the room, he said, though it was clear he also wanted company. Richard chuckled softly. Come on, there's room for both of you. The 3 of them slept together that first night, and Richard felt a peace he hadn't known in years. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now, continuing. On Monday, Richard took the boys to see his company. He wanted to show them where he worked and introduce them to the staff. The reaction was very positive. Everyone was charmed by the boys' manners and behavior. Sarah, Richard's secretary, offered to help with buying clothes and school supplies. During lunch, she took the boys to the nearest mall. Ethan had never had so many clothing options, Sarah remarked when they returned. He only picked the basics, saying he didn't want to spend too much of your money. Richard smiled. Even in a completely new situation, Ethan remained careful not to take advantage of others' generosity. In the afternoon, Richard went to the hospital to visit Amanda. He brought photos of the boys in the apartment and told her about their first day. I don't know how to thank you, Amanda said, crying with emotion. All these months, I tortured myself imagining how they were doing. Stacy always told me everything was fine, but I felt something wasn't right. They're wonderful kids, Amanda. Ethan has an impressive sense of responsibility, and Jacob is pure sweetness. Ethan has always been very serious. After his father died, he changed. He became a miniature adult, always trying to help me, always worried about everything. Richard realized he needed to help Ethan be a child again. The boy was carrying burdens too heavy for his 9 years. Over the following weeks, Richard established a routine for the boys. Ethan and Jacob were enrolled in a private school near the apartment. At first, Ethan resisted. "I can't go to school," he said. "I need to work to help with expenses." Richard knelt in front of the boy. "Ethan, your only responsibility now is to be a child. Study, play, have fun. Let the adults handle adult responsibilities." It wasn't easy to convince Ethan. The boy had grown used to carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders. But little by little, with patience and kindness, Richard showed him he could relax. Jacob adapted more quickly. At school, he made friends right away and began showing interest in drawing and music. Ethan took longer to open up, but also started excelling in his studies. A month after the boys arrived at the apartment, Richard received a disturbing call. It was Stacy. "You think you'll just keep my nephews that easily?" she said, clearly upset. "Stacy, the boys are well cared for and happy. I'm their family. I have more rights than you. You lost those rights when you neglected them. I'll show everyone what kind of man you are. A wealthy bachelor who wants to keep 2 kids. I'll spread the word that you have ulterior motives." Richard felt his blood run cold. He knew accusations like these, even baseless ones, could destroy his reputation and his work with the boys. "Stacy, you won't accomplish anything with threats. We'll see. I know people who can make your life very difficult." The call ended, and Richard grew worried. He immediately called Jennifer. "Richard, unfortunately, this kind of threat is common in cases like these," the lawyer explained. "People who lose custody of children sometimes try to blackmail those caring for them. What can I do?" "Keep doing exactly what you're doing. Document everything, maintain the boys' routine, and don't leave room for misunderstandings." That night, Richard talked to Ethan about the call without going into detail. "Ethan, if someone asked you what it's like living here, what would you say?" The boy thought for a moment. "That here we get to be kids, that you take care of us like you're our dad, that for the first time in a long time, I can sleep without worrying if there'll be food the next day." Richard felt his heart warm but also grew uneasy. If Stacy really went to authorities with false accusations, it would be his word against hers. 2 days later, his fears were confirmed. A different social worker showed up at the apartment for a routine evaluation. Richard immediately knew it wasn't routine. The woman asked specific questions about his relationship with the boys, where they slept, and what activities they did together. It was clear someone had raised suspicions. "The boys seem well adjusted," she said after speaking with Ethan and Jacob separately. "But I'll need to do some additional checks." Richard called Jennifer as soon as the social worker left. "This is what I was afraid of," the lawyer said. "Stacy must have filed an anonymous complaint. Now I need to find out exactly what she said." Over the next few days, Richard felt like he was being watched. There were unfamiliar cars parked on the street, people who seemed to be observing him when he went out with the boys. Ethan noticed something was wrong. "Mr. Richard, are we going to have to leave?" "Why would you ask that?" "Because you're different. You're worried, like I used to be when Aunt Stacy was mad." Richard realized he was transferring his anxiety to the boys. "Ethan, there might be some changes, but I promise I'll do everything to keep you both safe and cared for. If we have to go, will you still be our friend?" The question broke Richard's heart. In such a short time, those boys had become the most important thing in his life. "Always, Ethan, I'll always be your friend." Jennifer called on Thursday with bad news. "Richard, Stacy filed a formal complaint, alleging you're keeping the children for inappropriate reasons. She convinced some people that a single man with 2 boys is suspicious." "That's ridiculous." "I know, but we'll have to prove it. And in the meantime, the boys might have to be temporarily removed from your apartment." Richard felt the world crumbling around him. How was he going to explain to Ethan and Jacob that they might have to leave? Is there any alternative? 1. If we can find a foster family willing to take them temporarily, they might not have to go to a shelter. Richard spent the weekend desperately searching for options. He couldn't let Ethan and Jacob end up in a shelter. They'd already endured too much abandonment. That's when he remembered Mrs. Robinson, a retired employee from the company who had always treated other employees' children as if they were her own grandchildren. She was a widow, had a big house, and often said she missed having kids around. Richard called her and explained the situation. "Of course I can take them," Mrs. Robinson said immediately. "It would be a joy to have 2 children in the house." On Monday, Jennifer managed to secure an emergency hearing. Richard took Ethan and Jacob to meet Mrs. Robinson before the meeting with the judge. "She seems nice," Ethan said after spending the morning at her place, "and she makes chocolate cake just like Mom used to." Jacob was less optimistic. "But I want to stay with you, Mr. Richard." Richard hugged the boy. "I want you to stay with me too, Jacob, but sometimes we have to accept temporary situations to solve bigger problems." At the hearing, the judge heard both sides. Stacy showed up with a lawyer and repeated all the accusations. Richard defended himself with documents and testimonies from people who had witnessed his relationship with the boys. "Your Honor," Jennifer said, "my client has an impeccable professional record. The boys are clearly well cared for and happy, and there's documentation proving their aunt was neglecting them." Stacy's lawyer argued that she was the children's relative and that Richard was a stranger with questionable motives. The judge deliberated for 2 hours. When he returned, his decision was Solomon-like. The children will temporarily remain with a foster family approved by Child Protective Services. A full investigation will be conducted into the allegations against Mr. Richard. If they're unsubstantiated, he may regain temporary custody. Ms. Stacy may only have contact with the children under supervision until it's proven she can properly care for them. Richard was relieved Ethan and Jacob wouldn't have to go to a shelter, but heartbroken at having to part with them. As they left the courthouse, Ethan approached him. "Mr. Richard, thank you for everything. You saved us when no one else cared." Richard knelt and hugged both boys. "You saved me too, Ethan. You taught me what really matters in life." Mrs. Robinson turned out to be a wonderful caregiver. Richard could visit the boys 3 times a week, always accompanied by a social worker. The visits were only 2 hours, but he cherished every minute. During these times, he helped with homework, played, and talked about how school was going. Ethan was excelling in his studies, while Jacob was developing his talent for drawing. "Mrs. Robinson is really good to us," Ethan said during one visit. "But it's not the same. We miss you." Richard missed them every day too. His house had become empty and quiet again. Work had lost some of its meaning. He caught himself buying things they would like, forgetting for a moment they weren't with him anymore. The investigation took 2 months. Richard underwent psychological evaluations, had his personal and professional life scrutinized, and was interviewed dozens of times. The whole process was exhausting, but he knew it was necessary to prove his integrity. Finally, Jennifer called with good news. "Richard, all the accusations were deemed unfounded. The final report is very favorable to you. The judge wants to schedule a hearing for this Friday." Richard barely slept all week. At the hearing, the judge got straight to the point. "Mr. Thompson, the investigations found no evidence to support the accusations made against you. On the contrary, all reports indicate that you cared for the children in an exemplary manner. Temporary custody is reinstated." Richard felt tears streaming down his face. Finally, he could take Ethan and Jacob home. At Mrs. Robinson's house, the boys greeted him with tight hugs. "Mr. Thompson!" Jacob shouted. "Mrs. Robinson said we were going back home." Ethan, always more reserved, just smiled, but Richard could see the relief in his eyes. "Let's go home," Richard said, hugging them both. The return to the apartment was emotional. Richard had prepared a surprise. He decorated their room with drawings Jacob had made during their time at Mrs. Robinson's and bought new books for Ethan. "Now it really feels like our home again," Jacob said, running around excitedly. Ethan approached Richard. "Mr. Thompson, this whole time I didn't understand why you did all this for us. Now I get it." "What do you get, Ethan?" that sometimes God puts special people in our lives when we need them most. You're our special person. Richard hugged the boy, feeling like he was the one who had gained special people in his life. 2 months later, Richard got the call he'd been waiting for. It was from the hospital. Amanda was ready to be discharged. The emotions at the hospital were overwhelming. Ethan and Jacob ran into their mother's arms, and the three of them cried together for a long time. Richard watched the scene with mixed feelings, happy to see the family reunited, but also sad, knowing the boys wouldn't need him as much anymore. "Richard," Amanda said, still holding her sons, "I don't have the words to thank you for what you've done for us." "They changed my life just as much as I changed theirs," Richard replied sincerely. Amanda was still weak, but the doctors said if she took care of herself, she wouldn't have any more health issues. Richard offered to help with medical expenses and their return to a normal life. "I can't accept any more help," Amanda said. "You've already done so much for us." "Then accept a job offer," Richard said. "I need someone to coordinate a social project at the company, someone who understands the struggles families in need face." Amanda hesitated. "I don't have the qualifications for that. You have something better, life experience and heart. We can teach you the rest." Ethan tugged at his mother's sleeve. "Mum, say yes. Mr. Thompson is a good person." The family moved into an apartment Richard rented for them, close to the boys' school and Amanda's work. It wasn't as luxurious as his place, but it was comfortable and, most importantly, theirs. Richard remained a constant presence in their lives. He had dinner with them twice a week, helped Ethan with his harder schoolwork, and took Jacob to art exhibits on weekends. 6 months after Amanda's discharge, Richard went to the drawer where he kept the yellow truck he'd bought from Jacob. The toy was exactly as it had been the day the boy sold it. That Saturday, Richard showed up at the family's apartment, carrying a wrapped box. "Ethan, I have something for you." The boy, now 10 and visibly happier and healthier, opened the box and found the yellow truck. "My truck," he exclaimed, carefully picking it up. "I kept it for you from the very first day. I thought it was time to give it back." Ethan hugged the truck and then hugged Richard. "Thank you for keeping it. But now I understand that sometimes we need to let things go so better things can happen." "What do you mean?" "If I hadn't sold the truck, maybe I never would have met you, and then Jacob and I would still be lost." Richard smiled, once again amazed by the boy's wisdom. "You know, Ethan, you've taught me that sometimes we have to lose something to gain something much greater." Jacob walked over, holding his teddy bear. "Mr. Thompson, Mom said you never had kids." "That's true, Jacob. But now you have 2, right?" Richard looked at Amanda, who smiled through her tears. "If you'll have me as family." "Of course," Ethan said. "You're our father in heart." That afternoon, Richard realized the miracle hadn't been him saving 2 children from poverty and abandonment. The real miracle was 2 children saving a man from loneliness and emptiness, teaching him that true wealth isn't measured in money, but in the love we share and the lives we touch. 2 years later, Richard legally adopted Ethan and Jacob. Amanda had married Michael, a co-worker, and the family had grown even more. Ethan had become a responsible, intelligent teenager with plans to study engineering. Jacob had discovered an exceptional talent for painting and had already won a few school competitions. Richard looked at his new family and knew this was the best business decision he'd ever made, investing in love, care, and hope. The return had been infinitely greater than any profit his other investments had ever brought. The yellow truck stayed in Ethan's room, no longer as a toy but as a symbol that sometimes apparent losses are actually the start of unexpected gains, and that a simple act of buying a child's toy can transform not just their life but also our own. At his company, Richard created an assistance program for employees in need, always remembering that behind every story of hardship is a family with dreams and potential. Amanda became the program's coordinator and helped dozens of families rebuild their lives. Ethan often visited the spot where he used to sell the truck, no longer a desperate boy but a young man who wanted to help other children in similar situations. Together with Richard, he distributed food baskets and spoke with struggling families, always remembering that a chance encounter can change destinies. Jacob became an award-winning artist while still a teenager, his paintings depicting stories of resilience and hope. His works were sold at charity exhibitions, with proceeds going to social projects. And so, a story that began with two boys selling their most precious belongings just to eat turned into a cycle of generosity that touched hundreds of lives. The millionaire's miracle had multiplied, proving that when we plant seeds of kindness, we harvest forests of transformation. The end. Now tell me, what did you think of this touching story? Do you believe Richard made the right choice by insisting on helping the boys despite facing difficulties? Leave your honest thoughts about what moved you most in this narrative. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss other stories that will touch your heart.